Hello, and to the bold alone, welcome back as tonight we continue the Civilands series by finishing Book 1 Crimson River with Chapter 10, For the World to See. Hang on to your seats. I've got a doozy for you tonight, so prepare yourself for this roller coaster and we'll go on this journey together. As always, I'm Nicholas Austin. You're listening to Tuesday Night Fiction. With the smoke from the demolished camp at their backs, the Vahani made their final push toward the hold. Their horses raced onward as if the Keegans were right behind them. For all they knew, the gang very well could have been after what had just occurred. Hunger and fear combined into an overwhelming sense of desperation. From the moment she had pulled the trigger on the attacker, Latera continued to lead the way, with Elon only shouting out occasional orders for direction. In sight and in mind, she was the clear symbol that kept the Vahani from abject surrender. Lennox and Parrish simply became part of the group. Not only was their confidence waning, but also even their desire to lead had all but vanished. They were not equipped mentally or emotionally to guide the Vahani like Latera was. She had known this for a time now, and accepted their realization of it with no fanfare. Dust clouds filled the air at their heels. Along the way, Latera saw multiple heads turning back to ensure that they were not being trailed. But Latera did not look back, only forward. With their spirit nearly broken, Latera knew that capture by the Keegans would surely be the final straw for her people. She would need to be the symbol that demanded them to fight on, so she became it. For hours they rode with their vision progressively fading and with breaths turning to gasps. Then, after a period of riding through a densely wooded area, Elon made the call. "We are approaching!" "We are almost there, my brothers and sisters," Latera declared. Sure enough, a few minutes later, they cleared the trees that surrounded them and the gates of the hold came into view. Cheers filled the mass of the convoy. It seemed as if even the horses knew what the city would mean for them, and they whinnied along with the cheers. Confidence swept over Latera as she looked out on the massive hold. It reminded her in some ways of the great fortress. She envisioned the streets inside being lined with Tokali the same way the fortress was with Vahani in the north. The height of its walls was intimidating in that they showed the danger of what they were built to keep out. However, she rejoiced in the fact that at least a place this vast would not likely explode before her people's eyes. Elon guided his horse to the front. "I will lead the way to the gates," he explained to Latera. "Follow me slowly. Once the guards see me, everything will be all right. We will get you all inside and fed." Latera looked at him for a moment before nodding her assent. "Very well, lead the way." She then turned back to the Vahani to explain the need for calm and caution. As hard as it must have been for them to be patient in their final trot to their destination, Elon's promise of food and rest was too appealing for her people not to follow his instructions. As their horses began to walk through the final stretch of field, which was approximately 500 yards, they noticed movement in the guard towers. Gasps could be heard amongst them when they recognized that several men were beginning to take aim. "Elon, why are they pointing weapons at us?" Latera calmly asked. "This is standard," Elon quietly replied. "You can never be too sure of who will come knocking in these parts." This was not a response that would help the others remain calm, however, so she did not share it. She simply projected confidence and calm as her people looked to her. Meanwhile, her mind churned in circles. Without familiarity with this southern sector of the Murrieta, the possibilities of threats were limitless. The grizzlies did not roam these parts, so they would not be there to provide protection. Their only line of defense was the few rifles and petty weapons that they carried, which essentially meant that they were defenseless. When they reached the middle of the wide open field, their vulnerability to attack from each and every angle was evident and unsettling. With each breeze that passed by, Latera's body felt every chill. The wooded area that they had emerged from was noisy in the gusting wind, and the suggestive sounds it emitted made her cringe. There were already weapons pointed at their front, but Latera held an even greater fear of what could come from behind. Every bit of clacking from the steps of the horses rang in her ears like the beating of a drum. She looked in the sky, desperate to call up to the wind for a sweeping of the area. However, she did not want to alert the guards or worry her people any more than they already were, so she remained silent. "Stop there!" one of the tower guards suddenly yelled out. The bravado of his voice was alarming. But with a deep breath, Latera began to feel better about how close they now were to entering the hold. "What is your business here?" the same guard followed. Elon approached the front of the crowd and looked up at the guards. "It is me, Elon, son of Malik and Adila, and I have come with our allies, the Vahani of the Riverlands." When they saw him, they turned to one another and nodded. One of the guards remained with his gun now at ease, while the other retreated out of sight from his post. The remaining guard then replied, "Hold, Elon," before falling silent. The tension did not ease in Latera. The moments stretched painfully on, until finally the gates began to slowly open. A sigh of relief was emitted in unison from the tired, weary Vahani. After all they had been through, they were here at long last. They could finally resupply and replenish their malnourished bodies. There would now be a fighting chance for them against the ever-growing power of the Keegans. As the doors opened, there was more movement by the guard towers. The second guard, who smiled and waved at Elon, returned with a man and woman who did the same. He smiled back at them until they rushed back down out of the tower to greet him and the others at the gates. Once the gates had opened, Latera motioned to her people and the Vahani slowly approached the hold. When they entered, there was no one inside except the man, the woman, and the guards. "Greetings, friends," the man exclaimed warmly. "We are so pleased that you were able to make it here safely. We tried our very best to facilitate your safe passage along the way, but thankfully that is all behind you now. My name is Malik, and this is my wife Adila. We are the parents of your guide Elon. We cannot thank you enough for your graciousness," Lennox declared, stepping forward and dusting off his leadership again. Latera allowed him to do so. She wanted to observe their new surroundings before she announced herself in any way. She also was aware that though she'd become the symbol for her people, she had yet to formally become their leader, and now was not the time to challenge for that role. Lennox took a breath and continued. "We would not have made it here alive otherwise. However, we ran into some additional trouble at the second camp we found, so if you might have some food to spare for us, our people need it. I believe they have earned it. I am Lennox, by the way, the chieftain of the Vahani of the Riverlands." A concerned look crossed Adila's face. "Of course, we have plenty, a feast, to go around for everyone," she replied. "Whatever you all need, we have. But please tell me, what kind of trouble did you come across at our camp?" This time Latera spoke for them and explained. "A Keegan man rigged the camp before we reached it. As we approached, he leveled every last bit of it in a great explosion." Malik and Adila turned to look at each other. "This is very troubling," Malik said, pausing before adding, "Of course, this is also why you are here. Only together can we unify the Murrieta. We will worry about that once you are back to your full strength, though." "Yes, please join the rest of our people in the square," Adila chimed. "We have prepared a feast and celebration to welcome you and signify our unification. As your leader says, you all deserve it. Oh, and hopefully our Elon was a good host on the journey here. We are very proud of the sacrifice he has made," Malik cheered before turning to Elon. "Son, if you could please come with us while the Vahani are led to the square, we would like to welcome you back ourselves." Elon nodded and walked off with his parents, with his head hung down. Was he upset that she did not sing his praises to his father? She shrugged off the idea and focused on her people. The mouths of the Vahani watered as they followed the guards toward the square. They were excited to meet their allies and begin their work together, but at that time they were much more focused on regaining their strength. Latera could hear snippets of conversation all around her to that effect. It reminded her of her desire to send a bird to Hansa, if only she knew where to send it. All she hoped for was to receive word from him soon that he had safely reached the Mountainlands camp, so that she could in turn let her brother know she'd made it to the hold, and kept their people safe along the way. Trekking through the streets of the hold was almost as agonizing as pacing through the field to the gates. Each corner they turned and each set of homes they weaved through came up short of the mountain of food and celebration that they had envisioned. When the guards finally stopped in an open area that they could immediately tell was the square, their anticipation had reached its highest point. Observing the area, Latera saw they were surrounded by some of the larger buildings the hold had to offer, with balconies on each side of the square. She couldn't help but admire the beauty and composition of it. A great fire had been lit in the center of the square, as if to emphasize the architecture surrounding it. The greatest of all, though, was the largest of the balconies at the head of the square, which seemed to look over everything. The top of the balcony reminded her of the hill she had climbed. She envisioned the feeling she would get, addressing her people from such a perch. What it would be like to be above it all. This was a new thought that was now ever prevalent in her mind. After minutes of standing there in wait, she noticed the guards began to back away from the group slowly. Then she had a sharp realization. From the moment they entered the hold, all the way along their march to the square, there was still no one around. She wondered where they could all be hiding, and why. "We will be right back to fetch everyone," one of the guards suddenly cheered. "Just a moment, please." Then Latera's stomach dropped as the final heartbreaking oddity registered in her. Not a single one of the Tokali she had seen at this point in the hold, not the guards or Elon's parents, was wearing orange. That could only mean one thing. It was too late. As she looked up in horror, there emerged a swarm of men and women with weapons drawn from the balconies. Every single one of those who appeared wore brown clothing, and on the chests that were within her sight, she could see the Keegan pins. It was what was behind the apparel, however, that was most devastating to Latera. These men and women were not just Easterners in the ranks of the Keegans. Within the crowd of militants were Tokali as well. Elon's mission became clear to her then. The Vahani of the Riverlands had been herded like sheep southward, out of their home and into a place already controlled by the very gang they had sought to help defend it from. She didn't know why they would do this, but understood the gravity of the mistake her people had made. She was glad that Hansa was not here with her in that moment. He was still free. The truth behind Elon's behavior had finally become clear to her as well. The reason why they could not be friends, let alone something more. This was a crime that she would never forgive him for, not as long as she breathed. The surrounding Vahani were thrown into a state beyond terror. By now, they were well past that. Latera knew they were simply broken. She could see it in each one of them. They no longer had the energy to fear, to fight, or to run. They accepted that whatever fate the Keegans had planned for them would be the only peace they would now find. This became even more evident when Latera recognized Walter Keegan, Elon and Elon's parents among those emerging from the main balcony. Along with them were two other Keegan men as well. One of them took the lead, looking upon the square with a sinister grin. "Welcome to the South, y'all!" he shrieked. "How was the trip down here? Was it comfortable? How about the sights and the sounds?" Some of the Easterners began to giggle at the dejected Vahani. While Latera's fiery gaze was fixed on a clearly ashamed Elon, her people looked straight down at the ground. They did not dare to say a word or move a muscle as the Keegan man continued. "Not a talkative bunch yet, huh?" he resumed. "Well, my name is Clovis Keegan. I'm a brother of William Keegan. This here is my associate, Devin Turpin. And I take it y'all have already become acquainted with everyone else up here, so I won't give any unnecessary introductions. But hear this. I know most of y'all are afraid. And if so, then that's a good thing. Y'all should be afraid. In fact, y'all should be downright fucking terrified. Because if there's even a consideration being given to disobeying us Keegans, then there is only one thing that will happen. I don't need to tell y'all what that is, but I want to. Because I'm enjoying the look on y'all's pitiful faces. So shit, I'll tell you right now that you will die. Won't be a pleasant death neither, my friends. To avoid this outcome, y'all will trade with who we tell you to trade with. Fight for us when we tell you to fight. And recognize that you are no longer Vahani, or whatever the fuck it is you were before. Y'all are Keegans now. If I'm not mistaken, unification was the reason you tribesmen followed this bold young man Elon down here anyway. Wasn't it? He showed us how far the Tokali were willing to go to prove their loyalty. Now it's y'all's turn to join the fun. We have united y'all with the Tokali and the East. So it seems to me like y'all got your wish in the end. Thanks to us. You're welcome. Clovis Keegan had the most sinister smile Latera had ever seen. Like a hungry, rabid wolf, he looked down on them, and she felt, even in her anger, a trickle of fear enter her. Now let me tell you one more thing. No one needs to get hurt. So please, make some sort of noise or something if y'all agree to these terms of which you have no real say in. Still none made a sound, but they now turned their somber, starving faces toward the balcony. Well, kinda figured I wouldn't get much of a reply, Clovis called. But I have a feeling that'll all change in a moment. See, I know some of y'all are familiar with my cousin Walter. So maybe he'll be able to get through this wall of shyness there seems to be. Walter, you did have something to say now, didn't you? Please, step forward. Walter Keegan stumbled forward with the help of his cane and appeared very pleased to be standing over his previous captors. I do certainly have something to say, Walter exclaimed. I believe we all got off on the wrong foot when I first met you folks. And I'd like to right that wrong today so we can move forward together. If y'all could first please forgive my cousin. He did lie about one thing. And that was the fact that none of y'all will be hurt today. Sounds of sorrow could be heard from the crowd. Some began to cry and beg for mercy. Oh no, he continued. Don't get me wrong. The innocent will be spared, of that y'all can be sure. But there are snakes in y'all's midst. Would your noblest of councilmen please step forward? Lennox and Parrish remained in place with their heads down. After a second or two of waiting, Clovis took charge in outrage. I know we waited some time for your arrival, but we're not otherwise a patient bunch, he cried. If you bastards don't step forward, or if the rest of you do not cast these councilmen out, then you should all be prepared for a storm of bullets. The Vahani hurriedly located and pushed the councilmen forward. Lennox and Parrish fell to their knees for all to see. Latera noted the utter defeat in them. In a way, somewhere deep inside, she was almost thankful just for that. It was the only justice she would see, for their death at the hands of the Keegans would not qualify as just. No death at the hand of a Keegan could. Thank you, Walter cheered. How are you, boys? He snickered joyfully. It's been some time since I last saw y'all. The days don't seem to have been kind either. Let me ask, y'all tell these folks how this whole thing began? I'm sure y'all did, right? He waited for a moment and they did not move. Parrish actually began to cry. No? Walter mocked. Well then let me be the storyteller. You see, these two brave souls captured me back at the river when I was in the middle of some important business. The thing about it was, they had other intentions in mind than just my capture. Yes, sir. There's a darkness in them that even us Keegans can't stomach. Just after they got the best of me, these traitorous fucks went and killed y'all's chieftain. The Vahani began to erupt in shock and outrage. But Latera saw what Walter Keegan was doing. He was giving them a villain besides himself. Walter continued over them. Now I didn't much care for the man, but I saw that he was at least honorable and did not deserve to be fallen by his own counsel. I guess they didn't see what I saw though, because they each sent a bullet right through him and shot him dead into the river. He bled so much he turned that river white of yours crimson, I swear. Isn't that right, you greedy bastards? Jeers turned into screams, and the guards were soon forced to control the riotous crowd. "Bring them to the balcony," Clovis ordered, feeding off the furor in the square. As they were escorted, 2 ropes were thrown over the terrace. The cheers only intensified at the sight. Latera could see that somehow the Keegans were actually winning her people over. She struggled to think of something she could do to change that, to remind them of the Keegan villainy, to remind them of their true enemy. She had to act now. If she were to lose her people emotionally to these men, she knew there would be no hope to overcome their enslavement. When the 2 men reached the top, the crowd began to settle down in anticipation. Tara knew this would be her chance to be heard. "Coward!" she screamed up at Elon, as ropes were prepared for the men. He looked at her with wide eyes, attempting to silently urge her to stop. Cared for her safety, did he? The danger was all his doing. "How could you do this to us?" she yelled. "This whole time you were just leading us to this? We were led to believe that the Tokali were a proud clan, yet you are anything but. You are all weak. You are all scum." Clovis let out an impressed chuckle that was echoed by Walter and Devon. "Well, I see y'all have a brave one amongst you," he said. "Fortunately, we can't have that. Bring her up next, and anyone else who has a problem." Lavahani began to protest furiously as the guards apprehended Latera. Their reaction was all that she'd hoped it would be. Their cries surrounded her until she was thrown to her knees on the balcony and could hear Elon protesting. His anger surprised her. He fought harder even than her people. "No!" he implored. "She is the one I told you about. You promised that no harm would come of her." Except the harm he caused her and her people, Latera thought. "Elon, stop this, please," his father pleaded. Clovis looked at the boy and then at his parents. "Is there going to be a problem?" Devon asked them. "No, of course not," Adila assured them, to which Elon fell silent. An echo of Latera's earlier thought came to her. His true feelings did not matter if this was where his final decision fell. He was nothing but a traitor. He was never a friend. Clovis's amusement remained in his voice as he turned back to the square. "Are you ready to watch these traitors hang? My people?" he asked the crowd. The cheers from the Vahani were now less enthusiastic, but the volume was ever greater now as the surrounding Easterners began showing their excitement as well. "Walter, would you like to take one and I'll take the other?" "With pleasure," Walter replied. The nooses were placed around the 2 men's necks and they were forced to the end of the balcony with guns to their heads. "Climb up on the ledge," Walter demanded. Only Parrish, who was Walter's to push, followed the order. "I will not," Lennox cried with his body shaking. "I'm afraid it wasn't a fucking request, you dimwit." Clovis laughed as he pressed his pistol harder against the chieftain's temple. "Get up there now or get shot." Lennox peered nervously down at the ground below. "I would rather be shot than..." Clovis shrugged. "Fair enough," he muttered. He then loosened the noose and released it from Lennox's neck. Lennox's face was briefly filled with relief when suddenly Clovis lunged full force and tackled him over the ledge. Latera leapt up from her knees and no one stopped her. Their gazes were all riveted on the pair as they fell more than 20 feet toward the ground with Clovis tightly grappling his victim. The man was truly mad. The square was silent in anticipation. After what felt like an eternity, they hit the ground. Actually, only Lennox hit the ground, with Clovis using his body to break the fall. Though he was bloodied and bruised from the impact, the Easterners cheered for their leader. An initially shocked Walter shook his head, and soon after pushed Parrish to hang. The fall and impact of Clovis's body was somehow not enough to kill Lennox, who after reaching the ground lay writhing in pain. His attacker rolled around, cackling in his own merry agony next to him. "You said you would shoot," Lennox screamed. "Why?" Clovis looked up at the Vahani. "I did, didn't I?" he shrieked at them. "Well, I don't keep oaths to those that don't keep oaths," the square responded noisily. "The fun doesn't end," Clovis rallied. "It just doesn't ever end." Then he climbed on top of Lennox and began mercilessly beating the man's face in with his gun and fists and anything he could swing. Parrish continued to dangle as this occurred, and the crowd was sent into a frenzy. Blow after blow brought Lennox closer to death. Laterra was most deeply disturbed not by the violence itself, but by Clovis's enjoyment of it. After some time of carrying on, just before his knuckles popped out of his skin, Clovis was finished. He stood up victoriously and screamed at the top of his lungs, first in the face of his victim, and then toward his audience. After some cheering, however, the crowd went quiet, as croaking could be heard from Lennox. Laterra actually now pitied him, as she wondered how he could possibly still be alive. "Let him bleed!" Clovis called as he began walking back toward the stairs to the main balcony. Then, just as Parrish ceased struggling and let out his last gasping breath, a shot rang from the square that silenced Lennox once and for all. After realizing what had happened, Malik looked out in horror and yelled, "Gannon, no!" Looking back, Clovis started to laugh. "Well, I guess he got the bullet he asked for after all," he shouted as he almost simultaneously became furious. "Whoever that was, take that little shit away immediately. I'll deal with him later." There was a pause while the young man named Gannon was apprehended, and the others in the square got a grip on all that had just occurred. Laterra thought she'd like to meet this Gannon, the only Tokali she'd seen to show honor and courage. She thought they might get along. It was a wistful thought, though, as wistful as getting a chance to say goodbye to Hansa, considering that she was about to die. Once Clovis reached the top of the balcony, he interrupted the silence. "So who's next?" he squealed. Laterra was then brought forward, and the begging in the crowd for mercy commenced. "Stop!" Elon demanded as the rope was eventually placed around her neck. "Would your boy like to join her?" Clovis snarled at Malik. "Do you hear the anguish of her people below?" Elon pleaded. "She is clearly important to them. I have seen it. She is more of a leader to them than either of the men you just killed. You want them on our side, do you not? Do you remember the chieftain that Walter mentioned was killed? This is his daughter. They will go as she goes." Laterra looked at Elon a moment. How hard he tried to save her touched some part of her. It wasn't enough to forgive him, but it was something. Perhaps their friendship had not been a complete lie. Yet, in this moment, he failed to understand that she'd die for the sake of her people, and she'd do it gladly. She'd do anything for them, anything so that their spirit may live to fight again another day. It hit her then that they had that in common in the end. He'd do anything for his people, including destroy her own. If the Tokali truly had no choice but to submit to the Keegans, then maybe he had just done what he needed to do as well. After all, this is what a leader did. Put the people first. "They will go as she goes," Elon repeated desperately. Clovis grew angrier, though Laterra hadn't thought that possible. He looked to Walter and Devon. "Killing her is something that William and Daniel would probably like for me to refrain from doing. Would you agree?" he asked. Devon nodded. "It would most certainly seem that way to me, yes," he submitted. "They probably wouldn't have wanted the councilman to be killed either. But that actually worked in our favor with these people. Killing this girl might not have the same impact, I imagine." "Very well," Clovis exhaled. Laterra had barely absorbed the fact that the maniac that was Clovis Keegan could see reason, let alone that she would not be a martyr this day. When he shot her a dark, hungry look, Clovis slowly moved his hands to her neck, and turning his gaze back to Elon, he worked the rope in his hands. But rather than untying it, he actually tightened its grip on her throat to see Elon's reaction. Laterra could not see what he saw, but Clovis's gleeful smile told her that he had managed to find a new weakness to exploit in Elon. Then he turned his dead, crazed eyes back on her. "You know what'll happen if your people try to revolt against us, don't you?" he whispered to Latera. "Yes," she said, as sternly as she could. She would not cower in front of this man, not in front of her people. She knew he brought death, but if she survived this moment, she would make sure that he lived to regret it. Her people may be broken, but she could piece them back together. Yet, the feel of his fingers on her skin was cold and hardly felt human, so against her will she began to shake. Or perhaps the reaction was because of the fact that she could no longer breathe. Just as black spots began to dance in her vision, he expertly untied the rope and let her free. "Now please, my new comrades, eat!" Clovis cheered upon turning to the Vahani in the square. He then stormed off with Walter and Devon as her starving people rejoiced. The giddiness that pervaded in his display seemed to vanish as his men and he departed. With Elon and his parents' attention fixed on her, Latera walked out to the balcony to behold her people. She once again didn't know whether to be pleased or terrified by their excitement and relief. But there was one thing that sat inside her like a pit in her stomach, one fact that broke her heart right then and there. Regardless of what came tomorrow, as the Vahani now celebrated that they may finally eat and rest, Latera realized that the Riverlands, the only home she had ever known, had fallen. "I warned ya. You can't tell me I didn't warn you at the beginning. I said get ready. And if you weren't, well, you might have just got caught off guard, because the Tokali and Elon have betrayed Latera and the Vahani. What will come of this capture? The councilmen have been killed, but the people of the Vahani live on, and Latera lives on. How will life resume in the hold in Book 2? We'll soon find out. But for now, let's move on to part 2 of 3 in this final chapter. William Keegan received the news in the days following that all had gone according to plan on Clovis's front. He was pleased with the efforts of all his men and celebrated extensively with Judith. Much to his pleasure, his wife was particularly aroused when she heard the news. She told him that she felt like a queen in the Murrieta, a feeling she had considered only a dream during her time in the crowded cities of the East. Even with the wealth she had, there was nothing like the power that they were beginning to acquire. He was elated that she felt this way, as it was one more affirmation of his success. With Daniel seizing economic control of the Riverlands, and Clovis amassing an army in the south, it was now time for William to take the next step to turn their operation into an empire. He assembled his confidants in his study. Judith, of course, was already briefed on everything he was going to explain. "My friends," William greeted as he looked at Cassius, Gregory, Colin, Frankie, and Henry in turn. "I've assembled y'all here to discuss the next step in our conquest. As y'all may or may not have already heard, Clovis's mission was a success. The Vahani of the Riverlands have been successfully displaced from their home and are under our control at the hold. With all the work we've done here, we'll now have a firm grip on all dealings south of the Riverlands, which, as y'all know, is nearly 3/4 of the entire Murrieta." "William, that's marvelous to hear, my boy," Henry praised. "You should be so very proud of this accomplishment." "Indeed," Cassius added. "It seems everything went fairly closely to plan." "So what's our next move?" Gregory asked. This question in particular made William light up. He knew he was a brilliant schemer, and strategy was something he enjoyed even more than the resulting action. "I'm glad you asked. As I've said, we've a vast sum of this territory controlled now, but the mountain lands in its fortress remain in the hands of the Vahani. Once Daniel feels that he's won the people over in the Riverlands, and Clovis deems his army fit to attack, we'll then move north day by day until it's all ours. We should now have the resources to force our will upon the Vahani that remain." "Brilliant," Henry gushed. "Which brings me to the next steps for the people in this room," William continued. "My ultimate goal is not just to handle all trade in the Murrieta, but to also connect this territory to the great eastern cities from which we came, and take a cut of every bit of economic prosperity that comes from that connection. In order to facilitate this, Judith, Henry, and I will go back east, with the assistance of Cassius, to see my father. If there is anyone that can provide us such a partnership, it will be him. Once he sees what I've done here, there will be no way for him to deny how lucrative this can be. I'll set forth terms, and we'll have all that we desire. Even the thought that he could be close to achieving what he felt was his life's purpose had William giddy. "But Billy, I should go with you," Gregory pleaded. "The journey east is dangerous, and I should be there to ensure your safety." William turned to him. "You're one of my closest confidants, Gregory," he said. "For that reason, I need you here to assume my post in my absence. This is the most important role of any in our organization. I need you to ensure that Clovis and Daniel succeed in their exploits, and that we also maintain that which we have acquired thus far. Also, I need you to look after our family that remains here in Fayette. As for Colin and Frankie, y'all are to assist Gregory in any way he might require. Can I trust y'all to be up to this task?" "Sir, I swear to you that it'll be done," Gregory promised as the others nodded appreciatively. "Great. Thank you," William gestured. "Now we must be off, my friends. I hope to see y'all very soon, and when I do, we'll be rich beyond y'all's wildest dreams." With that, Judith, Henry, William, and Cassius were off to make preparations for the coming journey back east. He knew it would present its challenges, but all he could hope for was that things continued to go the Keegan's way. All smiles at the Keegan mansion. Everything seems to be going very well for the Keegan gang, as we finish with their story in Book 1. In Book 2, as we can see, William, Henry, Judith, and Cassius will continue on to New Berkeley for a whole new adventure. As for us, one section left in Crimson River. Let's finish this off. The snow fell softly now on the mountainside. Besides the faint whisper of the wind, there was not a sound to be heard. It was as if the mother had nothing left to say after all that had occurred in her domain. Now Hansa lay in her hands, barely holding on to whatever life remained inside of him. The winter cold had his body so numb that he was no longer aware of the pain from his broken arm. In fact, he had lost almost all feeling in the rest of his limbs as well. As he lay there, now awake in the snow, he prayed for the safety of his new friends. They were all he thought about despite his current predicament. He would have gladly accepted that this was the end for him, if he could simply know that they would be all right. He'd endured too much loss, and he hoped that this would be the end of it. After some time of shivering and pondering in solitude, the swallow he had seen earlier had returned to him. The little bird landed in the exact same spot on the tree above him, shaking off some of the dusty snow as it reached its perch. Hansa was glad that he was once again not alone. "Hello there," he whispered in his shivery, chattering voice. His words were hardly audible in his current state. "Thank you for coming back." The swallow stared at him and did not make a sound, but it did not matter to Hansa. He was just happy with the sight of a familiar face. Did you find them?" Finally, the swallow responded. "Alive. Together," it hissed back. Hansa was overcome with joy. His friends were well, at least for now, and he had company. Unfortunately for him, it was not meant to last. In the distance, a faint sound could be heard, which scared the swallow off. This was devastating for Hansa. "No, come back," he begged, beginning to cry. As much as he knew he should be worried about whatever it was that was approaching him, he wasn't. Whether it was something that wanted to eat him or simply the wind, all Hansa wanted was to not be alone in his last moments. He thought about his father as the sound grew nearer. A memory came to him from a time that he was lost in the woods near his people's camp. Latera and he had been playing a game of hide-and-seek, in which he had inadvertently fallen into a ditch. As he lay there in the snow now, he remembered hearing the voice of his father echoing through the woods then, calling out his name. "Hansa!" he remembered hearing with tremendous vibrato. As he lay in the quiet of the mountain, beginning to feel dizzy, he replied aloud in a whisper, I am here." Again and again, his father called out to him from his memory, "Hansa, where are you?" As loudly as he could, as if his father would be able to hear him now, he yelled in a hoarse voice, "I am here." Suddenly, someone came running over to him, causing him to jump out of his daze. When Hansa realized that he was no longer in a memory, he continued crying, but out of fear. "My boy, do not cry. It will be all right. Everything is going to be all right. You are safe now," the man standing over him promised. Hansa tried his best to see through his blurry eyes and struggled to remain calm. When he had finally relaxed, he was able to see who it was standing above him. A smile spread across his face as he whispered, "Uncle Oren, you found me." And that will do it, both for Chapter 10 and for Book 1 Crimson River as a whole. Next week we'll be back to talk about everything. We'll discuss what happened. We'll unpack the emotions, the betrayals, the finale, the successes, the failures, everything. We'll talk about it all next week in the recap episode. And then, right after that, we'll be back with Book 2, Crystallize. We're going to move right into it. This podcast is covering the entire Civilands series. It's all going to be free, but if you'd like to support, these are obviously based on books. They're in paperback and ebook, so even if you prefer listening in podcast form, I greatly appreciate the support. It keeps the podcast going. And if you enjoyed the books, if you enjoyed the story in any form or fashion, go ahead and give a review on Amazon or Goodreads. Tell the world that you're part of something here and that you enjoyed the ride, and take others along with you. This is a community. We are the bold alone, the Civil Gang. And we will keep on, week after week. We're only just getting started. The journey has just begun. We finished book 1 of 5. We have 4 to go. And it's only getting wilder. It's only getting crazier. And we're only going to be learning more about ourselves. This is a coming-of-age series, as I've mentioned. We're going to discuss morality. We're going to discuss religion. We're going to discuss politics. We're going to discuss war. We're going to discuss family. Things that hopefully any little nugget might help you in your daily life, and maybe you'll help me if you reach out and you give me feedback. Tell me what you like about the episodes. Tell me what you like about the music. Tell me what you don't like. Tell me what could be better. Let's learn from each other. Let's grow together. Let's build this together, and let's go for a fucking ride. Once again, from the bottom of my heart, if you've made it this far in this series, thanks again for listening in. It really means the world to me, and I'm happy you're here. As I mentioned, next week will be a doozy. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things in the recap episode and talking about what's next. But until then, I'm Nicholas Austin. This has been Tuesday Night Fiction. I hope you have a good night, a good recovery from the traumatic events of this chapter, and we'll get through it together next week. Bye, friends.
This sound will call with spirit true. I swear I'll hear that sound in you.
The Tuesday Night Fiction podcast, the Civilands series, and the musical score for the podcast